Hello, AP Bio. So today our topic is how humans fit into all of the things we've been talking about in this unit about ecology. Today we're talking about human impact in ecosystems. And so to start with, I'm going to have you take just a couple minutes and learn a little bit about your lifestyle's impact on the planet. So you'll see a link in the note that's going to pop up here in a second. Please go and calculate what's called your ecological footprint. And when you finish, take a look at how many planet Earths it says that your lifestyle would take to support. Here you can see some of the ecological footprints of some former AP Bio students. This is a graph I had, I think, from last year. We used a slightly different quiz yesterday, but the idea was the same. An ecological footprint quiz is measuring how much of the earth it takes to sustain your lifestyle, the food that you eat, the ways that you travel, the goods and services that you use, what it takes to support you. And the one that we used previously measured that in city blocks, and it also measured it in how many planet Earths it took to sustain your lifestyle. And you can see former AP Bio students ranged from like 1 2/3 of a planet up to, this is actually about 3.5. The last one's kind of hidden behind my little video over here. What this means when it tells you how many Earths it would take to sustain your lifestyle, what this means is if every single human being on the planet lived the way that you do, we would need that many planets to have enough cropland and produce enough timber and have enough oil and coal to generate all the fuel that you need. That's how many Earths it would take if everyone lived the way that you do. So the important thing to notice here is that no one, at least no one in the United States, usually takes one of these quizzes and gets an answer of 1 Earth, that we could all survive living this way on the one planet that we have. And obviously this is a problem because we only do have one planet. And more people in the world want to have a lifestyle similar to our lifestyle in America. And so as more and more countries develop and move towards a more kind of modern lifestyle, more and more people are using resources, and the planet simply doesn't have enough to sustain that. And the important thing about this is that all of these actions, all of these things that we do, take away from the living things that share the planet with us, from those biological communities that we've been talking about. We've talked a lot in this unit about the idea of biodiversity, and we're going to review that a little bit today. You're going to watch a short 7-minute video clip. The link will be in the note here. And as you watch this video, listen for the 3 types of biodiversity that are listed on this slide. And they'll also go through these 5 reasons that biodiversity is important. Make sure you kind of understand what each of these means and take some notes on this as you go through. So there are many, many values to having this diversity of living things within individual ecosystems and around the entire planet. And unfortunately, there are a lot of human activities, things that we do either intentionally or unintentionally, that are detrimental to the biodiversity that we have on the planet. We kind of summarize those human-caused threats to biodiversity with this acronym, HIPPO, HIPPO, that stand for kind of the 5 main threats to biodiversity. And in recent years, we've also added a 6th one. We've added a C. So we talk about HIPPO plus C as these main threats to biodiversity. The first one, the H, stands for habitat loss. That one's pretty self-explanatory. As we expand, as we build houses and roads and everything else, we take away habitat from the species that live there. The I stands for invasive species. Invasive species, you may or may not be familiar with these. Invasive species are things that are not native. That means they don't naturally live in that ecosystem. You've probably heard of some things like zebra mussels. That's one that you hear about in Minnesota sometimes. Eurasian milfoil. If you took a boat anywhere in Minnesota this year, as you put boats in and out of water, you often see signs to wash off your boat really well and drain all the water out of it and make sure you're not carrying these invasive species from one place to another. Because the problem with invasive species is since they're not naturally part of the ecosystem, they often don't have a lot of predators. And so they tend to kind of take over. They use resources, they eat other species, but there's nothing to kind of keep them in check, like we were talking about yesterday. So they tend to disrupt that natural food web. The first P in hippo is population growth. The most important thing to remember about that one is that we are referring specifically here to human population growth. We're not talking about overpopulation of beetles or oak trees or anything like that. We're specifically talking about the growth of the human population, which of course leads to a lot of the other things on this list. The more people there are, the more space we take, the more habitat gets destroyed, the more we move around and carry invasive species places. So all of these are very interconnected. Pollution is also probably a pretty self-explanatory one. That could be air pollution, water pollution, all different types. The O at the end of hippo stands for over-harvesting. This is also sometimes referred to as overconsumption, and it basically just refers to when humans use too many natural resources. So that goes back to that ecological footprint idea, the fact that we're using kind of more than our fair share of the resources on the planet. The last one on here is climate change. And like I said, this was added kind of after this acronym was first invented, if you will, as climate change started to become more and more of an issue. Climate change obviously is something that is happening at a global scale, and so it's threatening biodiversity all over the planet, in the oceans and on all of the different continents of the planet. There are a few pages in your book, several diagrams and charts that summarize what climate change is and some of the major effects. And you can see this graphic that you have on the screen also mentions many of the effects that are already being observed and measured as a result of climate change. So take a minute, please, and grab your textbook and just look at the figures in chapter 43 to make sure that you understand basically what causes climate change, and also some of the effects that are being observed at different levels of biological organization. As I mentioned when we talked about hippo, all of these stem from the increasing population of humans in the world. So this graph just summarizes how the population of people has increased over the last 1,000 years or so. And you can see for a long time, the human population was fairly steady. But then from around 1900, kind of right around when the Industrial Revolution started, the human population, especially in certain parts of the world, has really started to take off. The good news is the human population growth rate is actually decreasing. Notice this graph is not showing the size of the human population, it's showing the rate of growth. And so there have been some dramatic changes. You can see there are a couple of big events that happened here, but overall the rate of growth has been decreasing. And you can see this graph obviously was made in the 20 teens, somewhere like that. But they are projecting that this growth rate will continue to decrease. Keep in mind, though, as long as this rate is still above 0, that means the human population is still growing. It's just growing more slowly than it had been previously. And so as the human population continues to grow and expand, and we know that we are having all of these effects on the ecosystems around us, one of the big ideas that has kind of come to the forefront in a lot of people's minds is this idea of sustainable development. And a brief definition of that is just planning the present with the future in mind. So that means when you're designing the houses that we live in and the materials that you use, and how we make and use and reuse the products that we have. And when we design the vehicles that we travel in, we try and design things that don't use as many resources, and keep that future in mind, and realize that we need to start conserving the resources that we have and find ways to maintain the lifestyle that we want, but still keep that future in mind and kind of think about what we're leaving for future generations. Your task for today is going to be to learn a little bit more about the different ways, both positive and negative, that humans are impacting ecosystems. So when you go back to the lesson in Google Classroom today, you will see an attachment called Human Impact Stations. You should probably just spend 10 or 15 minutes reading through some of the information in there. Notice you do not need to know all of the vocabulary and every single one of the questions in here. I will not ask you specific questions, test questions, or anything about the content of every single station. But the important thing is just to have some examples in the back of your mind and kind of understand all the different ways, not only the negative ways that I kind of talked about today, but also some of the positive things that people are doing to try and minimize our impact and protect the biodiversity that we have on the planet. You don't need to write anything down, though if you would like to add a couple examples from these stations into your notes, you are welcome to do that. You'll see some questions in there. Those are just to give you some things to think about. But again, you do not need to answer every single one of those. So just spend a little bit of time looking through those so that you can see all the different ways that we as humans interact with the planet and the diversity of the ecosystems that surround us. There are also a couple of reminders at the bottom of the screen about upcoming due dates. If you have any questions about anything that you're working on or anything that you see in those stations today, feel free to shoot me an email, and I will get back to you as quickly as I can. I hope you have a great afternoon.